quite dramatic. It's quite dramatic. Here's an egg with the key to save 10 animals. The other option is to kill 10 animals. Which one would you choose? Like, when has that ever happened? Okay, this is not Squid Game, this is not Saw, this isn't some horror movie. Hi guys, it's Rose and welcome back to Cheap Lazy Vegan and another Vegan Talks video. These Vegan Talks videos are basically videos where I sit down and I talk about a topic regarding veganism that I am interested in, that I want to yap about. So welcome! If you like this sort of thing, make sure you stick around. I'll also link my playlist below of my previous Vegan Talks videos so you can have a look and watch those if you want to.
So guys, it seems that I have yapped for way too long, so I actually had to separate this video into two parts. This is part one and part two will come out in a few days, and once it's out I will link it below. So make sure you are subscribed. You also turn on that notification bell so you know when that next video is out. Also, a quick side note, I am hosting a vegan trip in Vietnam in January, and if you guys want to come along to one of my vegan group trips, this is going to be a great one. So I'll have that link below so you can get all the info and you can book if you are interested in coming.
So today's video is not a video I ever thought I would make, but here we are. I guess you should never say never. So I am going to be responding to a video by Ali Tabrizi, and it is titled, "Why I'm Leaving 100% Veganism After 13 Years, and You Might Too After This." If you don't know, Ali Tabrizi is actually a filmmaker, and he is most well known for making the film SEASPIRACY, which some of you or many of you may have seen already. I think it's still on Netflix. It's basically a film that kind of explores the harmful nature of commercial fishing and how bad overfishing is for our environment. And it's very much a vegan forward film. It has like a vegan message, okay? So I actually know Ali, or knew Ali personally, so this is a little uncomfortable for me to sit down and make this video, but this isn't like any sort of personal attack or any sort of drama against him. It's more so just a response to some of the claims and some of the things that I feel like it's important for me to respond to. So I knew Ali because about 10 years ago when I was living in London, we were actually in London at the same time. Around that time, we both had kind of YouTube channels that were taking off. So this was like the beginning of my YouTube career, if you will. I started my YouTube channel in 2015, so like literally 10 years ago. I'm pretty sure he had started around the same time. And there were other vegan YouTubers at the time that were kind of up and coming, and there was this like nice vegan community in London, and we would go to, you know, vegan events and go to vegan restaurants. We would have meetups, and, you know, we even collabed together a few times. Like, I think I was on his channel, he was on my channel. So we, you know, we were kind of like friendly acquaintances, if you will. Like, we hung out a few times.
I was very involved in the early kind of vegan activist movement in the UK back in 2015. I had a very popular YouTube channel back then, which is since off the internet. I later then directed SEASPIRACY, the Netflix original, which became one of the top 10 movies on Netflix. I wore vegan activist t-shirts, vegan activist hoodies, went to protests, went to rallies, filmed the slaughter of animals extensively, knew this issue inside and out, networked amongst some of the most well-known vegan content creators online.
He was definitely more in like the activist space, and he was definitely more involved in the vegan community than I was. Like, for me, yes, I went to some vegan events, and yes, I did make some friends with vegans, but I wasn't like super ingrained in the vegan world. My day-to-day life wasn't like, oh my god, activism, veganism, like all that stuff. It is, of course, to a lot of people's surprise that he made this video. He also made this article, which I watched this whole video and I also read the article. And the article is titled, "The Vegan Lie, What I Discovered After 13 Years Inside the Movement." In subtext, it says, "After 13 years in the trenches, I no longer believe veganism delivers on its promises. Here are the biggest problems with veganism, which no one on the inside has told you." It's quite dramatic. It's quite dramatic. And spoiler, like, we have talked about this, okay? Vegans do talk about stuff like this, but let's get into it, okay? So one thing I just want to say before we even jump into this video is that I feel like I don't actually have a problem with a lot of the things that he brings up in the video. My biggest problem is the framing of this and the sensationalization of it, like the clickbaity, why I'm no longer vegan, why I'm leaving veganism, the vegan lie, what the vegans won't tell you. Like, it's very sensationalized, and I know he's a filmmaker and everything, but I think it's quite damaging to this movement. especially if you care about animals at all. Like, it is very damaging to kind of put out that kind of clickbaity title that is basically fuel for the anti-vegans. And, you know, I don't think they need more fuel. You know, we have enough anti-vegans. We do not need to add more to this. And especially if you are a director of a very prominent vegan documentary, I think, you know, you have a little bit more of a responsibility. You know, again, if you care about the movement at all still, I think if he approached this in a different light, in a different way, to maybe discuss the vegan gray areas and the questions that he has as a vegan, the things that we might want to consider even as vegans, I think I would have I wouldn't even make this video, to be honest. But the problem is, I think, the framing and the whole, the very much, I don't believe in veganism, throwing the vegans under the bus. I don't like that. Okay, well, let's get into it. Okay, I'm gonna play the video. This is gonna be a long video. Get a snack, get some water, okay?
I have been a vegan for 13 years. I became vegan when I was 18 years old. It has been one of the things about me as a person which has really defined my identity for a lot of people.
So first he starts a video off by giving some background to his veganism. Talks about, you know, how vegan he was and how involved he was in the vegan movement, which I agree. Like, he was very involved in the vegan movement. Now, one thing I will say is, I think one of the things that happens is when you go vegan, when you are vegan, you go through kind of different stages, I feel like, okay? Initially, when you are first vegan, I don't know if it's just, I don't want to call it like the honeymoon phase, but like when you first go vegan, I feel like you feel awakened, right? So you are, I feel like, more passionate. You are very passionate. You are ready to change the world. You are ready to make the world better. You're ready to save the animals, like all of these things. I do think you are like extra gung-ho in the very beginning. And especially if you couple that with your age, right? So if you are young, like in your late teens, early 20s, that is the time when you feel like you can change the world, right? You're like young and you're fighting for justice, and that's across the board with every justice movement. It's always led by young people. And then I think as you get older, I think you tend to shift a little bit. And you also, I don't want to say this, but you tend to kind of lose a little hope at the same time. That does kind of happen. I think you kind of realize how hard it is to actually change people's minds. You realize how much more work it is to get people to eat vegan and understand this message. You kind of realize a lot of things through time, and maybe you become a little bit more realistic about certain aspects of veganism, especially if you were, you know, in your early 20s, starting out with veganism in this kind of exciting space, surrounded by other young vegans, surrounded by this culture and activism. You're probably a lot more kind of passionate about it. Maybe now that he's kind of not in that space, something has changed. I don't know.
I began to realize, and I'll explain the moment that triggered this, that veganism doesn't actually hold the monopoly to causing the least harm through dietary choices. And that actually there are many examples of a vegan choice that causes more harm to animals than if you directly consumed the non-vegan counterpart to that product.
This is kind of like the premise of the entire video. He kind of gives these examples and then compares them to what he believes is the non-vegan equivalent. And he kind of says the vegan one is much worse because of whatever reason, so you might as well consume the non-vegan counterpart. Just right off the bat, I do have a problem with this notion, because what he does is he just kind of picks, you know, specific scenarios and says, well, this could be better if it was non-vegan. Now, my problem with this is that instead of looking at the forest, you're looking at a tree, okay? Instead of looking at the entirety of the forest, you are looking at one tree and saying, okay, this is the problem. Whereas it could be a healthy forest, but then the tree is diseased, and you think, okay, well, the forest is not good because this one tree is diseased. Am I making sense? We need to look at veganism as a whole and the impacts of a plant-based diet in someone's life as a whole. Now, does that mean every single choice that somebody makes is going to be better than the non-vegan counterpart? Maybe not. Maybe there are some cases in which you could make an argument, okay? I do think it takes a lot of mental gymnastics, but maybe there are some cases in which you can make that argument. But overall, when you look at someone's dietary choices or lifestyle choices, what makes the least amount of impact? Okay, and I would argue that it's probably veganism, right? Especially when it comes to the animals, like when we want to protect animals and do less harm to animals, the entirety of a vegan diet would be better than if you were eating non-vegan food all the time. So you can't be just sitting here nitpicking at every single little action somebody does, because then there's always going to be a slightly better option. There's always going to be a slightly more ethical way to do things, okay?
Now, this may not seem like a big deal, except for the fact that it completely undermines pure veganism. 100% veganism, abolitionist veganism. Essentially what it shows is that in instances on the fringes of the bell curve of what we eat, if you imagine the bell curve like this, and at the center you've got the staples that we all eat that's very cheap and reliable and sustainable and accessible in most places: bread, rice, pasta, beans, vegetables, fruit, peanut butter, oils, those kinds of things. On the fringes, you get specialty items that are replacement products that tend to be less accessible or more expensive, depending on where you live, by the way. And it's those things which I'm about to expose as being potentially more damaging to animals.
Veganism isn't always pure abolitionist veganism, right? So the Vegan Society definition is: veganism is a philosophy and way of living which seeks to exclude, as far as is possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, or any other purpose, and by extension promotes the development and use of animal-free alternatives for the benefit of animals, humans, and the environment. In dietary terms, it denotes the practice of dispensing with all products derived wholly or partly from animals. I do think that there is room for subjectivity a little bit when it comes to this definition, even though at the end it does say it's the practice of dispensing of all products derived from animals, because veganism is a way of living that seeks to exclude, as far as is possible and practicable. So that part is by definition subjective. Now, obviously, if you go into McDonald's and eat a burger, that's not vegan, but like there are definitely cases that are gray areas in which you could argue that, okay, this practice itself is actually not adding to the exploitation of animals. I've always been not 100% purist when it comes to veganism. Like, for example, I still buy secondhand leather. I don't think there is a problem with buying or using secondhand leather, whereas some vegans would say that that's not vegan. I think that there is a case to be made here, especially in today's day and age. I've never had that 100% puritanical viewpoint.
Now, what triggered this was about a year ago. We were going on a camping trip with my kids, my wife and kids. We wanted to bring marshmallows along, of course, for this beautiful family, memorable moment. But as a vegan, of course, you have to think about this kind of stuff. Now, unlike when I used to live in the UK, where vegan products like marshmallows were a bit more accessible, even though they're a bit more expensive, here in Australia, they just really don't exist almost anywhere. In order to get vegan marshmallows, me and my family had to drive half an hour into the city to a place we never go to a specialty vegan store to buy vegan marshmallows. And then we obviously had to drive half an hour back, and we had to go over a toll bridge this time. That's $5.60 each way. So it's like, $11 or something total. And the vegan marshmallows that we got were a very small bag that cost about $16 for about less than 300 grams. $16. On the way home, I'm doing the maths in my head. I'm thinking, $16 plus the $11 or so toll bridge, plus the fuel, wear and tear, all the stuff that goes along with owning and running a vehicle, and the total amount of money that we spent on this whole round trip to get a packet of marshmallows. Surely, if I would have just hypothetically bought the animal gelatin marshmallows at the local supermarket for $2.50 without spending all the fuel and toll bridge fees, and all the money I spared, not even if I gave all of it to an animal sanctuary, even if I just gave a couple of dollars that I saved to an animal sanctuary, surely that's going to do more tangible, measurable good.
Okay, so he talks about his epiphany when he went to buy vegan marshmallows from a specialty store where he had to drive a half an hour one way, pay a toll fee, and then pay $16 for the vegan marshmallows, whereas you could get, non-vegan marshmallows for a fraction of the cost. And this is like his sort of epiphany where he realized, oh, is this really doing the best for animals? Here's my controversial take, and this is just my speculation. I don't believe that it was this marshmallow incident that actually, had him questioning veganism. Like, obviously I'm not in his head. I have no idea. But it's like, it shouldn't take this incident to all of a sudden start questioning the entirety of veganism. After you've been vegan for 13 years, you've definitely come across instances where you had to go out of your way to get the vegan product. You've definitely had to go out of your way to, live this vegan lifestyle. I feel like it's very hard for me to believe that it was the marshmallows that kind of changed everything. Like, this is the first time you have to pay extra for a vegan product, drive extra to get the vegan product, to go out of your way to find the vegan product. It's like, this is not the first time this has ever happened. You probably were already having this feeling, and then all of a sudden you have to buy these vegan marshmallows, and then it added to your narrative that veganism is, maybe not as great as I thought it was, and blah, blah, blah. I just don't believe Okay, I could be wrong. I'm not saying that he's lying. I just don't believe that this was the time that you decided, okay, veganism is a lie, you know?
On the drive home, I started to realize that actually this was insane. This can't be what ethical living looks like, surely.
No one is saying that you buying vegan marshmallows is ethical living, right? It's like no one thinks because you bought a vegan candy that you don't need to eat, let's be honest, that is the definition of ethical living. And what kills me is like the way that he's making it seem as though the vegan marshmallows were, you know, kind of a necessity, like, you know.
So in the article, he says, was this really what ethical living looked like? Is this what people needed to do to be ethical people? Is this what I had been asking people to do to be deemed anything other than an evil animal abuser? First of all, nobody was asking you to buy vegan marshmallows. Vegan marshmallows were available as an alternative to regular marshmallows, but nobody was saying in order to be vegan, go buy vegan marshmallows and then you will be an ethical person. This is a major straw man of a vegan argument. We say boycott animal products because 99.9% of the time, those products come from industries that severely abuse animals. Nobody is saying going to buy vegan marshmallows, driving all the way to pick up this specialty product is what ethical living looks like, okay? And you're right, you might be able to find certain cases, maybe in the case of vegan marshmallows, where you can say, okay, this doesn't really make sense. Maybe just buying the regular marshmallow is actually more beneficial. I don't think most people would look at someone buying regular marshmallows and call them an animal abuser. This is, again, a straw man.
I have gone camping many times in my life as a child, and there were many times of which I went camping without marshmallows, okay? It is definitely not a necessity to have a great camping experience. Now, I understand if you want to give your child this great camping experience and you want the marshmallows, like, great. Sometimes you have to go out of your way to do things, vegan or not vegan, okay? To do something fun, like, you have to go out of your way to go and, like, do the thing. Like, you know, have fun. Or just, like, don't go. Like, don't go and get the vegan marshmallows. I feel like that would have been the more reasonable option. But again, we're focusing on this one thing that you may do once a year, like driving to the vegan store to buy the vegan marshmallows. Like, how often do you do that? You know, how often do you go camping and buy vegan marshmallows? It's probably like maybe once a year you do that, and you're ignoring the big picture impact of your lifestyle and your diet, especially if you have a family of 4 or 5 or whatever. It's like if all of you are vegan, it's like think about how much more damage you'd be doing if all of you were eating animal products. So
I started to think, well, surely if I would have just hypothetically bought the animal gelatin marshmallows at the local supermarket for, you know, $2.50 without spending all the fuel and toll bridge fees, and all the money I spared, not even if I gave all of it to an animal sanctuary, even if I just gave a couple of dollars that I saved to an animal sanctuary, surely that's going to do more tangible, measurable good.
the problem is people are not going to buy the non-vegan marshmallow or the non-vegan whatever product and take that difference in cost and donate it to an animal sanctuary. If you are going to donate it to an animal sanctuary, you probably would have already donated to the animal sanctuary despite how much you were saving because you are buying the non-vegan equivalent of a vegan product. How many people are gonna sit here and calculate, okay, I could buy a Beyond Burger for, I don't know, $5 a patty. I don't know how much they are nowadays. Or I could buy the regular burger for $1 a patty. Let me take that $4 and put it into an animal charity. It's like no one is doing this. Like this is not, maybe he did this one time. I don't think that this is a practice that will continue.
The subsidies that are involved in the animal agriculture system subvert and distort any so-called supply and demand knock-on effect that a vegan lifestyle is meant to cause. And so that was one thing, the supply and demand issue.
Okay, I have a lot of problems with that statement. I understand that there are subsidies that governments give to these animal agriculture industries. I get it, and that is a big problem. So I do think that we do need a top-down effort as much as we need a bottom-up effort, as in we need vegans, but at the same time, we also need to try to change legislation and change, you know, the way our government runs things. It's not one or the other. It's important to also abstain and boycott these products because that's like the easiest thing we could do right now, right? It's like The one thing we could do immediately, we could start to vote with our dollar and not buy animal products, make somewhat of a dent. And of course, if it was just me by myself, I'm not gonna make a difference. But if we spread the message, like, you know, a lot of us vegans do, and we get more people to eat more plant-based, then that is going to have an impact on the supply and demand of things. And, you know, whilst it is a bigger hill than we might want to admit, I don't think that it means it's not worth climbing.
When it comes to things like gelatin, it's really an afterthought of the animal agriculture industry. It's not the thing that the industry hinges on. It's not the thing that it gets most of its profits from. It's not the things justifying the entire industry. It really is a byproduct, as much as vegans like to deny that. It really is a byproduct of the industry.
I don't deny that gelatin is a byproduct of the industry. This is why I feel like if you had framed this video differently and talked about the gray areas of veganism and discussed maybe byproducts and things like that, then I would have, you know, been on board. I would have maybe agreed with a lot of things. He goes on to give examples of which it's not a byproduct. You know, he talks about Kit Kats, for example, and like comparing vegan Kit Kats to regular Kit Kats. Now, Kit Kats have dairy. Dairy is not a byproduct. It's the product of the dairy industry. So if we were only talking about byproducts, then yes, I think we can have a conversation. But he's not just talking about byproducts. We're talking about all kinds of niche products.
So why even bring up that gelatin is a byproduct and that you only need a very small amount of gelatin to make marshmallows when clearly he doesn't care about that, because later on, not too much later, he talks about how, oh, you can consume dairy cheese. So the whole point about gelatin is irrelevant because he doesn't care if it's a byproduct or not. Clearly, right now it seems like, you know, that's what he cares about. But later, you'll see very soon that he's not just okay with consuming byproducts, but he's very much okay with doing a lot of things.
So my thoughts on the gelatin thing is, yeah, I do think it's kind of a byproduct, to be honest. I still don't consume gelatin, but, you know, it is a byproduct in a sense that I believe that if everyone stopped eating beef, okay? If we all stopped eating cows, then the industry would cease to exist. The gelatin as a product that we use in food, it would just kind of cease to exist because no one is going to breed and kill cows for gelatin. If we didn't have beef and, you know, dairy and all that stuff, we're not gonna be killing cows just to get their gelatin. Okay, gelatin is a byproduct. I do agree with that.
I just want to clarify that I think we should still avoid gelatin because even though it is a byproduct, it's still a source of profit for the beef and dairy industries. And by purchasing products made with gelatin, we are still supporting the beef industry. But I still do believe that if we were to stop eating cows and dairy, I believe there would be no more gelatin industry because it just wouldn't be profitable for people to breed cows into existence simply to get their gelatin. So that was my point. But yeah, I still think we should try to avoid gelatin. Now, will I think you are the most evil person if you consume a tiny bit of gelatin? No, that was my point.
Even without donating some of the savings that I made to an animal sanctuary, even just side by side without giving any of the money I saved to an animal sanctuary, I'm almost certain, in fact, I think I am certain, that animal gelatin-based marshmallows are causing less of an impact than vegan marshmallows.
Okay, I think that's a pretty bold claim. Again, I can kind of understand his logic with gelatin and how it's a byproduct, but to sit here and say the animal-based ones do less than the vegan ones, like where is the evidence? Like how do you know? Why are the animal-based ones causing less impact? We've looked at the cost difference, and we've also looked at the fact that the vegan marshmallows were imported from Germany. But we're not looking at everything here. Sure, maybe the marshmallows were made in Australia. Were all of the ingredients made in Australia? Were they shipped from the other side of the world? Like, we don't know. So it's kind of a bold claim to say that the animal-based ones would do less harm than the vegan ones.
And also, how about just not buying the marshmallows? You know, that is an option. And he keeps bringing up opportunity cost in this video. So if we were to discuss this, wouldn't it then make the most sense to just not get any marshmallow and just literally take all of that money, all the $16, and then just donate that to charity? Because now you've saved any trip to any grocery store, you didn't buy any marshmallows, now you can take all those funds and donate it to charity.
So you could say, oh, okay, fine, be vegan apart from the marshmallows. Okay, that's fine. Well, first of all, a lot of vegans won't be happy with that.
Well, I'm not happy with this video. I'd rather here's the thing. I would rather that he just get the non-vegan marshmallows and just not make this video. Because this does way more damage This does way more damage to the vegan movement and to animals and all of that than having non-vegan marshmallows. I'm not saying you can't be honest about your choices. I think a lot of vegans would understand to some degree. Who cares what the vegans would say, right? Who cares? Oh, vegans wouldn't be happy with that. Okay, I disagree with vegans all the time. I also agree with vegans. A lot of vegans disagree with me. That doesn't make me less vegan. That doesn't make somebody else less vegan. Some people might think that I'm not vegan enough. I get it, okay? But that doesn't mean that I'm not vegan enough. People have called me a fake vegan. I don't give a fuck. Who cares, right? It's about trying to do less harm, right? Trying to do less harm. It's not about being perfect, and it's not about getting approval from vegans, okay?
In fact, I'm pretty sure the majority of vegan activists won't be happy with that because they take an absolutist position that consuming a product that has animal products in it is therefore kind of justifying the entire system and feeding into this narrative that animals are here to be objectified and used. And so there's no cost that could be great enough to justify the moral harm from using even a smaller piece of animal products.
I think it's important to have a vegan framework to work within, which helps us understand what products to consume and what to avoid. Once we start allowing in little things, this is where the slippery slope happens. You know, you could make a case for sure that in some cases, the vegan product, which has to be shipped from wherever, may actually end up doing more harm to animals than the non-vegan counterpart. Like, for sure, that case could be made for certain products. I don't think many products, but sure, for certain products, yes. But especially when it comes to things like food, when you start allowing the few little things in and you start kind of normalizing these things as food again, then it is very easy in this non-vegan world to fall into this slippery slope and start consuming a little bit more and a little bit more, then allowing this, rationalizing that. All of a sudden, you're just getting bacon and eggs for breakfast. So I think sometimes having that vegan label and having that framework and having those boundaries helps us stay accountable.
I think a lot more vegans are a lot more reasonable and more realistic than he makes it out to be. So of course, there's gonna be plenty of vegans that are what he calls abolitionist vegans, puritanical vegans, vegans that are very much like, I will not come near an animal product, or some vegans that say, I don't want to eat in the same table as somebody that's eating meat. There are vegans like this, I understand, and I get it, okay? I get it to some degree. Now, I don't live my life that way. I've never been a purist vegan. I think, you know, it's a little dangerous to kind of assume that like the majority of vegans are going to have such a problem with you having a tiny bit of gelatin. I think a lot of vegans might be like, you know what? Like, if that's really important to you, then like, okay, I guess so. My problem is this whole justification of it. My problem is this whole like, veganism is a lie. You know, I'm leaving veganism. Maybe you should leave veganism. That's my problem. My problem isn't you having a tiny bit of gelatin.
Vegans will be familiar with this hypothetical, which is if you're a vegan and if I could tell you that you could save the lives of 10 animals by eating just an egg, would you do it? For me, the answer is, well, yes, actually. I'm of the position that if I can save 10 animals by eating an egg, by having a chocolate bar with some milk in it, by having some marshmallows with some animal gelatin in it, I think that's the better choice to make here.
But when are you ever in that situation? Like, when are you ever going to be faced with that decision? When are you ever like, hello, here's an egg. Here's an egg with the key to save 10 animals. The other option is to kill 10 animals. Which one would you choose? Like, when has that ever happened? Okay, this is not Squid Game. This is not Saw. This isn't like some horror movie. This is like a hypothetical situation, which doesn't ever happen in reality. Never have I ever, in my 11 years of veganism, been given an egg and told, hey, if you eat this egg, you'll save 10 animals. That doesn't happen. It doesn't happen.
Vegan abolitionist attitudes to this is usually to brush it off as some kind of unrealistic hypothetical that has no bearings in the real world.
It is an unrealistic hypothetical that has no bearings in the real world.
Well, it turns out that analogy actually hits the nail on the head when it comes to the daily choices that vegans are making and the opportunity costs to their decisions. And I'll give you a few examples other than those marshmallows, okay?
It doesn't hit the nail on the head. Spoiler, he doesn't give any actual example of how this would be an actual realistic scenario. There is never a scenario that I have ever seen where you could be like, okay, well, if I ate this egg, I could save 10 animals. okay? And to be honest, if that was actually presented to me, I would eat the egg and save the 10 animals, okay? Bad vegan? I don't think so. Again, I feel like there's like a straw manning going on where he's kind of misrepresenting what a lot of vegans might actually think. He's saying a lot of vegans would say, no, they're not gonna eat the egg. Because I don't want to save the 10 animals. Like, how many vegans would actually, given that actual scenario, if you actually sat down and in some kind of horror movie and somebody has like a knife to, you know, 10 animals' throats, on the other side was an egg, and they're like, well, if you eat this egg, they'll save the 10 animals. How many vegans would actually say no to that? I think the majority of vegans would actually eat the egg, okay? I think so. But we're not living in that scenario. Like, that is not the reality of our lives. Like, that is not what's happening. And he goes on to talk about things, but it doesn't actually prove his point, right? It's like, there is never a scenario in which that I've seen, nor has he presented in his article, nor in this video, that shows that vegans make choices that kill animals when they could have just making the choice to eat the non-vegan thing, and then somehow that saves animals. Like, that's not a scenario rooted in reality at all.
Vegan cheese. Now, growing up, I used to eat a lot of dairy, but I used to love eating feta cheese. Now, vegan feta cheese here in Australia for a block about this big is $9. Now, the equivalent dairy option, made from either goat's milk or something, is $3. So you're looking at least a 3 times price increase. The same might be true for various types of candy bar, chocolate bar. I remember in the UK, before we left, the vegan Kit Kat came out, and the price difference was just insane. And so here you have this issue of price parity. Now, a vegan will often say, well, that's just because these are new items on the market. There's not enough demand for it. Once the demand increases, then the price will eventually go down. Fair enough. That may be true with some of the products that have made it into market that you can look at over the years and say, well, yeah, the price has come down. I think that's actually usually the exception to the rule, whereas the rule generally has been that prices haven't necessarily come down. They've either stayed the same or actually have gone up in price. Now, one quick example of this from memory is Oatly barista milk. When that came out, it was awesome. I used to drink it all the time. It was around £1.50 for a litre, which was a little bit more expensive, but it tasted amazing, so whatever. About 8 years ago, it was £1.50. Today, they sell for around £2.50, maybe even £3 in certain supermarkets. Now, 8 years have gone by. You'd hope that in that time there's now more vegans.
But it's inflation. Like, inflation is a huge factor. If you look at any news right now, if you look at elections around the world, the cost of living is a huge discussion in basically any political climate because inflation is a real problem. Non-vegans complain all the time about the cost of goods, cost of their food, cost of groceries. We need to take that into account. Obviously, 8 years ago, things are going to cost much less than they do now, especially with the hyperinflation that we've been experiencing. So this isn't just oat milk that has, you know, gone up in price. And the thing is, of course, these specialty products are going to cost a little more than the mass-produced counterpart because of economies of scale, right? When you have giant industries that make dairy and they make cheese and that is sold to, like, you know, the majority of the population, that's gonna have a lower cost and a lower price point than the vegan products that is catering to maybe like 1 to 3% of the population. So those are specialty products that are made in smaller factories. They don't have economies of scale. So they're gonna cost a little more. And he showed the examples. Oatly was £1.50, and then he says now it's £2.20. So really it hasn't gone up that much. It's like 70 pence. So that's not a crazy amount. Again, after considering inflation, go on TikTok and search up grocery prices 2025. Guaranteed there's gonna be people complaining about how much the grocery prices have gone up. It's not just vegan products. I understand that vegan products have a little bit of a premium when you are buying vegan products, okay? This is why I always say that most of your diet should be not products that are vegan, but food that's vegan. So not to be all appeal to nature, not to be all, oh my God, we must eat naturally. But if you actually focus on kind of whole food, plant-based for the majority of your diet, it is going to be cheaper, okay? It is cheaper. Of course, you can add little things like oat milk, maybe vegan yogurt, vegan mayo. You can add little things like that, but that is not the bulk of what I eat. What I eat in the bulk is gonna be literally rice, beans, pasta, potatoes, sweet potatoes, lentils, tofu. Like, these are things that are very affordable, even after inflation.
the idea that just wait, hold fast, vegans, eventually you're going to cause the prices to decrease, is built on a huge naive assumption that given enough time, given enough vegan documentaries, given enough social media posts and campaigning about going vegan, that the world or any particular country will eventually become vegan. And then the prices will just be like they are for the animal equivalent.
It's not completely irrational to say, yes, once we increase the vegan population and once we increase the demand for some of these products, then the pricing will most likely be able to go down, because then there will be more supply of these products. They can produce more of these goods, which actually decreases the cost per unit. So this is called economies of scale. For those of you that haven't taken economics 101, it's basically where, let's say you're producing 100 products, okay, 100 units of a product. So let's say you're making vegan cheese. To make the vegan cheese and 100 units of the vegan cheese, you still need a factory, you still need people to work, you still need, certain products that are kind of like more fixed costs, right? So like you need a factory, you need to run the factory, you need to pay the operating cost of that factory. So if you only produce, like, let's say 100 blocks of vegan cheese, then per block of vegan cheese, the cost per unit is higher. But then when you start to increase, let's say now you're making 200 blocks of vegan cheese. Now, even though your overall cost is going to go up, the cost per unit is going to go down, because you already have the factory, you already have kind of the basic things that you need. So it's called economies of scale. The more products you produce, more number of units you produce, the less it's gonna cost per unit. It's simple economics, like it does work in that way. Now, maybe the problem is, we don't have as much vegans as we thought. Maybe we haven't grown the vegan community as much as we could. But I think the biggest problem is inflation. Inflation, okay?
Vegans create more demand, the supply increases and price goes down, is not something that actually works, because we're not in a free market by any means. Around the world, particularly in the United States, but also elsewhere, the price of dairy is sort of set by the government. There are government subsidies, incentives for producers to produce a lot of it, and they get paid for the extra that they produce, regardless of whether there's any consumers for it. And so today, they can't get rid of the stuff fast enough. There are farmers that are literally having to pour truckloads of dairy down into the drains just because they got no market for it. And they have to dump it, because if it goes into the marketplace and creates a boost in the supply, the cost of dairy will go down, and they can't afford that to happen. So they literally just dump it. They're also having to bury cheese in these huge cheese caves across America just to store it. And so in the case of that vegan cheese, for example, but you're probably best off buying the regular feta cheese for $3, and with a couple of the dollars that you just saved, instead of getting the vegan kind, giving a few of the dollars you saved to either an animal charity or a political lobby group that's going to petition the government to end the huge amount of subsidies going to dairy.
Buying cheese still isn't going to help this issue. Like, it's not going to fix this problem with overproduction, nor is it going to fix the problem of government subsidies. If anything, we're still showing that there is this high demand for cheese instead of showing that the demand is going down, okay? We're assuming that nothing is ever going to happen if the demand goes like really down. But like, if the demand is like almost nothing, yes, there might still be, there might still be lobbyists that are trying to, change the direction of things. But at the same time, it's like if the demand is like fully down, then there are going to be changes. No, am I just naive? I don't know.
Now, at some point, right? Like, if literally nobody is buying cheese and nobody is buying dairy, do we actually still assume that the governments still are going to subsidize the dairy industry? But at some point, if demand goes down enough, then there's probably not going to be any more dairy industry, okay? Because the government at some point is going to be like, there is no point of subsidizing these industries anymore. And also, these political lobbyists need to have funds to be able to donate to governments to do their bidding. So if the industry is failing and doesn't have the funds, then those political relationships are going to be very difficult to maintain. Now, it's probably going to be a very long time before the dairy industry loses its power, but it's not completely irrational to think that one day, if demand drops enough, then it will make a big difference. And also, like, you will see that he completely contradicts himself a little bit later on.
And the thing is, you can still not buy the vegan cheese or not buy the regular cheese. Like, you don't have to buy the cheese, okay? Like, And you can still petition the government to stop subsidizing these industries. We can still do that political work and at the same time either buy the vegan cheese or not buy the vegan cheese. Does that make sense? Like, why would we add demand to the industry, showing that there is still demand to the industry, and then petition the government to stop supporting the industry that makes the cheese? What? I don't know. This is like a lot of mental gymnastics.
And another thing is he keeps talking about these opportunity costs that might, that you might be foregoing by buying the vegan option rather than the less expensive non-vegan option. What about the opportunity cost of making this video versus actually making a video exposing the dairy subsidy issue, the dairy industry, and the government subsidies that produce a surplus of dairy products? Because a lot of people don't know about this. So instead of making a vegan hit piece, he could have made a video talking about the government subsidy issue, because clearly he knows about this topic, and that would have been a lot more educational and a lot more helpful to the animals.
But in terms of actually helping animals, in terms of alleviating the pressure on dairy cows, it's doing nothing, I'm afraid to say. Now, you could say that the overall non-dairy market of sort of plant-based milks, soy milks, oat milks, as a collective has put pressure on the dairy industry in certain places, such as the UK, where there are examples of dairy farms that are now not so profitable, and it's something that they predict will be out of business at one day.
Isn't that contradictory? So there's nothing a vegan has done when it comes to buying non-dairy products that has made too much of an impact on the product. Now, first of all, I think the problem is you're saying that there's nothing a vegan has done when it comes to buying non-dairy products. It's more so the boycotting of the dairy products. I don't care if you buy the non-dairy products, just don't buy the dairy products. I went through, for example, when I first went non-dairy, I actually went non-dairy before I went fully vegan. This was like 12, 13 years ago, and I bought vegan yogurt, okay? And this was like a very different time. I bought this vegan yogurt. I thought it was absolutely disgusting. It was like the worst thing I've ever eaten. I literally thought it went bad. I was like, this is like not good. I threw it away, and I didn't buy vegan yogurt for years because I just thought it just didn't taste good, and there just weren't many good vegan yogurts in the market. I just didn't buy it for years. But it's like, I was fine, like I didn't need to buy the vegan yogurt to avoid the non-vegan yogurt, if that makes sense. Like, I still avoided the non-vegan yogurt. I just didn't buy any yogurt at all. Same thing with vegan mayo. In the beginning, vegan mayo was gross. Okay, I don't know if you guys remember, like 10, 12 years ago, like I would try different vegan mayos and it was like gross. Like, I did not enjoy it. Now I do buy vegan mayo because it's much better. Now, when I was avoiding the vegan mayo, did I buy the mayo? No, I didn't. I just like avoided it. So it's not that vegans are saying that when you buy the vegan products, it helps. It's more so the boycotting of the non-vegan products. That's the point. So he said that there's nothing a vegan has done that has made too much of an impact. But then he goes on to say that overall non-dairy market as a collective has put pressure on certain places, such as the UK, where there are examples of dairy farms that aren't profitable.
But a lot of that demand isn't from the vegan market, which is maybe 1 to 3, maybe 5% of the nation if you're lucky. 5% is very, very high. I think Israel might be the highest percentage in the world of vegans. But I think really when it comes down to it, it's the majority of regular flexitarians, meat eaters who are choosing the non-dairy option.
So he claims that it's not from the vegan market, which only makes about maybe 1 to 3% of the population, but who are the ones that have been promoting the non-dairy alternatives for years? Who are the ones that have been spreading awareness about dairy? I would argue that vegans had a lot to do with it. Now, that doesn't mean everyone that consumes non-dairy products are vegan. Of course not. So of course that's a big part of it. But a lot of it has to do with the work that vegans have done to dismantle this notion that dairy is a necessity to our diet. I think vegans spread a lot more awareness than he is giving credit for.
Also, this shows that not buying dairy helps decrease the demand, which decreases the profits of the dairy industry, whether or not you are vegan. So his entire point about how it makes no difference if you buy dairy or not is disproven, because we can see here that because enough people didn't buy dairy, it decreased the demand, and given enough of a decrease, it can significantly hurt the profits of the dairy industry, and therefore that industry may cease to exist at some point.
And even if it isn't just us doing it as vegans, like full-on vegans, we can still say, hey, dairy ain't good, buy the non-dairy alternative, and then we push people toward that direction. But buying the dairy is not gonna help do that.
Now, I know in this video I mainly talked about boycotting being the most important thing, but I do think that there is an importance in having and supporting the vegan alternatives to products, even if it might not be every day, because then you are, again, increasing the demand for those products, increasing the market share, and therefore more of those products are going to be available. And most people's struggles with veganism is the convenience factor, not having the convenience to be able to go to the store and buy the yogurt that they want, to be able to go to the cafe and get a baked treat. Once we add in more and more of those items and infiltrate more and more of the market, then we're going to have more people that are less reluctant to try out vegan products, even if they may not go vegan right this second. I also believe that at some point, if we are able to reach a certain percentage of the market, then it'll be almost like a snowball effect, and it'll be easier to convince more people to try out veganism. All right, you guys, so that is the end of part 1. I apologize, I had to separate this into 2 videos, but it was just way too long for me to edit in one go. So I hope you guys stick around to watch part 2. That'll be out in just a few days. So if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe, maybe turn on that notification bell so you are aware of part 2 coming out, and of course my other future videos as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you leave any thoughts on any of the topics that we discussed below. In part 2, we'll be discussing the rice and beans topic, secondhand leather, and responding to the notion that vegans are the most reluctant to donate to animal charities. Whew. And of course, the topic of backyard eggs and why comparing them to tofu is not a fair comparison. All right, guys, I will see you in part 2. Make sure you thumbs up this video if you enjoyed it and share it with anyone that might find it helpful. And like I mentioned in the beginning, if you want to come along on a vegan group trip to Vietnam, check out the link below. Bye.